If you've been following what's happening in Web3 and blockchain, you've likely heard of Diego Borgo. Diego is a Web3 and Metaverse advisor and the co-founder of BorgoLabs, a consultancy that helps companies position themselves and drive growth in the Web3 space. He's the first person I've invited for a second interview on this podcast because I really wanted to pick his brain on why we're still in the deep and when the space might recover. We discussed the reasons why Web3 and blockchain have yet to become strong independent industries. We also touched on some fresh new projects that offer real value and explored where the space is heading in the next few years. And of course, no podcast would be complete without bringing AI into the equation. That's where things get really interesting. His perspective on this is really eye-opening. Enjoy the next 40 minutes and don't forget to subscribe to our channels wherever you're watching or listening.
Welcome to The Product Show. Insightful interviews with founders and tech leaders sharing how they hack product growth.
Diego, a year ago we sat here on this podcast discussing the bear market, hoping things gonna get better. And here we are, a year later, things haven't improved much. We are still in the deep. What happened? I hold you personally responsible with what's happening in Web3.
It's my fault.
It is.
It is my fault.
What went wrong?
I'm super stoked to come back. Yeah. I think that our industry is still, and when I say our industry, I say Web3 overall, is still very immature when it comes to being sustainable or standalone. Therefore, the industry is still very connected or closely connected with speculation and market cycles of cryptocurrencies. And that's kind of like what I think that's still holding us back a lot, right? Because they tend to say that, yes, cryptocurrencies are part of blockchain, but blockchain does not equal cryptocurrency, right? And there is a lot that can be built and done within blockchain technology that does not necessarily demands cryptocurrency to be part of it. But overall, since obviously Bitcoin started that whole movement and technology, we're still extremely connected and attached to the hype cycles. And, you know, if you look from a macroeconomy perspective, cryptocurrencies are not the only digital assets or assets, financial assets that are down. The entire world economy from an investment perspective is down. So I think that plays a role, but doesn't necessarily mean that in the future will always be like that. I believe in a future where cryptocurrencies will be a use case within Web3, Web4, whatever will come next as next iterations of the internet, but it will not necessarily dictate whether people will be using or not, whether VCs will be investing or not, whether entrepreneurs going to be building or not, or if brands going to be adopting or not. But I think we're still not there yet. And you see that on, you know, the conversations, the market, capital investment, adoption, and other rates that, you know, we see every day.
Right. So what have been the most significant changes in the space over the last 12 months? Has there been any major shift from your standpoint of view?
We have seen a lot of negative news. Again, if you want to stick to cryptocurrency, FTX, Terra Luna, and many others collapsing and unveiling a lot of the things that unfortunately is still being very prominent in our industry. You know, again, on that sort of like cryptocurrency side of things. I think that from a Web3 overall point of view, we have been last year throughout a very strong hype cycle, right? From, let's say, mid 21 all the way down to end of last year. There was a really hype cycle within brands, especially, right? If we look at brands adoption, there's 350 plus brands within the Fortune 500 realm that have done now something within Web3, or they identified as a strategy that they've deployed within the Web3 space. And that displays one interest, but also displays the sort of like the hype cycle that we went through last year, because, you know, a lot of them just had something because they wanted to have a headline, or because they had to tick a box, or just do an activation, right, from a marketing standpoint. So I think that also has sort of like brought a lot of attention to the space, but not necessarily all positive, because many of them have failed, or many of them weren't able to deliver against what they set themselves to. Therefore, it became a little bit harder for them to keep pushing it forward. AI is undeniable, the amount of attention that AI has received and is receiving, and a lot of VC money went down that direction, a lot of brand interest went down that direction, a lot of entrepreneurship development or building went down that direction. And a sort of like extra sauce to that, especially when you look into the US market or the American market, is the SEC cracking down on cryptocurrencies and sort of like arguing around digital assets as a whole, and looking to regulate a space where, if you look clearly what's happening, they don't necessarily seem to be very clear on what is being done. Therefore, there is a very big agenda on the back that, is quite clear for us to observe, that is pushing directions, not necessarily because he has to, but because something else is happening in the back, right? So I think that amount of, things put together have brought us to a moment where I don't personally think is negative. I think that where we are right now from a development perspective is extremely interesting or extremely exciting, because whatever you do in a bull market is going to stick, is going to be quote unquote successful, especially from a financial standpoint, and is going to have traction. Therefore, almost anything works, and you don't necessarily need to do the most deep or the most sustainable business models or project rollouts or go-to-market strategies. In a bear is the opposite, because when there is much less liquidity or much more less interest or much less resources available, things need to be much more thought through. And when things are much more thought through, then we start leveraging the actual possibilities or the actual opportunities that technologies like blockchain can bring to the table. So I'm excited again about going through another long bear market, from end of 17, beginning of 18 till mid 20, early 21, we went through that, and here we are again. And I think that the biggest difference of there and here is that we are dissociating more and more the overall space from cryptocurrencies only and amplifying to other use cases. And more than that, we see much more rails or, almost like platforms or products being built to support mass adoption. Because we talk a lot about mass adoption, but as soon more than 100,000 people or wallets, whatever you name it, start hitting networks at the same time, we see that we're not ready for that, regardless of the chain you're talking about.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of things that are fostering and enhancing it, because now enterprises want to play within that space, right? So there is bigger money, there is bigger compliance, there is bigger things that needs to be done for them to bring their customer base to it, which will equal in mass adoption moving forward.
I'm really glad we are past the speculative phase of Web3, when value was based purely on hype and on empty promises. You didn't really know what's going to happen with the project. It was all about how much trust you have in the team, and unfortunately, it was very disappointing for many people who believed in the space. And I think we are now seeing more and more projects that provide immediate value and often solve a real need, which is the most important thing when you're building a product, 100%. Right? Could you give me a few examples of companies that are truly succeeding in what their projects are? And like I've heard of a few examples of people coming to your podcast, right click, save the world. Everybody go and check it out. It's really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I really like that you invite guests who have found a way to build and provide real value, as opposed to just, jumping on the train and taking advantage of the hype.
Yeah, I mean, we are trying to show different angles, right? And the idea there with the podcast is exactly the same. So how are super well-established companies like Volkswagen or, Alo Yoga, or established agencies like Vayner3 from the Gary Vaynerchuk group, And even, really big thought leaders that have been around for a long time within other technologies, for example, like AI, and trying to get their point of view on things, right? The sort of like the sustainable elements of that past the hype, as you just said. So that's kind of like the mission there, right? Is bringing a conversation from 3 different or 4 different people that see the space or are part of the space from different angles and have different perspectives through experience, right? So to your other point, companies that are sort of like being successful or developing something sustainable in the space, I think that is exciting to look at. I always look at the underdog because everybody's talking about Nike, everybody's talking about Gucci, everybody's talking about Starbucks. And I like looking more sort of like the underdogs, right? Because usually the ones that are not necessarily pushing too much sort of like the PR element of that or getting a lot of social attention, because whatever strategy is being rolled out in the back are the ones that interest me, because a lot of times they are rather building and letting results speak than trying to, get everybody to talk about it. So I think Reddit is a great example. I think that, is a very clear rollout where they have a native audience that understands this space and isn't necessarily in it, or some are, but they have full understanding of it, right? Reddit has been building communities, because that's the word we've been using, for the last 1.5 years, every time we speak, for years, right? They truly understand that concept. They have played with avatars or assets, digital assets, that unlock certain areas of their product or give people certain benefits based on what they hold for years, right? It's a super well established platform. And I think what is interesting within their strategy is that they went on putting a lot of that technology not necessarily in front of the consumer. So I tend to say that the biggest mistake we've made as an industry in this first cycle or this first hype cycle was to look at the technology as the product.
Exactly.
Rather than the technology as the enabler. So all the time we were talking about buying an NFT, minting an NFT, whereas the NFT here became the product, right? So if you think that the technology is the product, some people are going to get excited about it, as a lot of people that are Web3 native or are on Twitter are excited about it, but it's extremely difficult to talk to the masses within that message, because we know really well that the average Joe doesn't give a fuck about the technology. They like the experience. They like the way that can benefit their life or make their life better, right? So I think that looking from that angle, Reddit did a really good job on making the technology the enabler rather than the product per se. Although obviously you could still, purchase the actual digital collectible and so on, but they kept building on top of that. And I find that quite intriguing and exciting. I think that also there are a lot of other companies that are looking into the possibilities of tapping into their already existing audience rather than the Web3 native audience. I think that from a strategic point of view, that's where a lot of those strategies hit a wall or a ceiling of adoption, because there isn't a lot of people within Web3 that you could consider active, right? If you look at analytics, there's about 1 million active wallets within that space. I have 8 wallets. I don't know how many you have, but I'm sure you have more than one. So when we drill down within that space, definitely is not 1 million people, right? Very likely we could put all those users in a building or in a stadium, and that's still sort of like the main audience that all those brands were targeting. Now, the question is, how can you reverse engineer the technology as the enabler and provide a better experience for your already existing customer base and fans, instead of trying to make that Frankenstein strategy and even comms rollout where a lot of brands got themselves into, to fit within an audience that became more and more difficult to connect with because they got super spoiled, because out of a sudden everybody in the planet wanted to please them. So that's the way I'm looking at that, right? I'm looking at almost like a V1 and a V2 of Web3 and NFTs, right? The V1 was back in December 21 when Adidas launched into the metaverse and used NFTs as an asset class, right? You can mint The revenue comes from minting, the secondary market gives you revenue, and that becomes sort of like the use case for NFTs. And then Nike went on and acquired an artifact, and both brands doing those big moves within that space has sort of like kicked off the bull run for brands in Web3, right? And as I said before, fast forward to today, 350 plus brands have entered that space now, but still that playbook is pretty much what they've took pages from or iterated on, right? Majority of those brands have utilized that playbook, and the main use case for them was NFT as an asset class, right? So now that we understand that the market is not buying into it as much as they did, that now there's much more offer than demand, now that the cycle within cryptocurrencies is obviously in a bear, as we just touched, and now that we see countries like the US going super heavy on laws and sort of like regulation around that, what is the exit, or what is the next, better than exit, what is the next step for brands? And that's what I'm really intrigued and really excited about, because there is a need for a second playbook to start to be written. And there is a need for us to start looking to much more than just an asset class and what else this technology can do for us.
Yeah. And we kind of used to talk about this bridging the gap between Web 2 and Web 3. And for some reason, majority of people from the industry have been focused on educating people. While it is obvious that in reality, what they needed is not to be educated. They just wanted to experience it. They wanted to see, how this can enhance their experience as a user, as a customer, and obviously for businesses, to open their eyes and see what are the opportunities in front of them. We sat here on this podcast with your friend Brenton Nails, CMO of Smart Token Labs, and he shared.
Shout out to Brent.
Yeah, and he shared with me an example of an open loyalty program they did with famous Australian cricketer Glenn Maxwell. I think it's called Catch Max, where they engaged thousands of fans with their membership program without people even realizing that blockchain tech was behind it. And that's what we need, right? So we don't need people to understand what this is from a consumer adoption point of view. We need to convince brands what is the opportunity in front of them and how they can engage their fans better. Do you think that is the next wave that we're seeing in front of us?
100%. And I think that when we say we need to bring the masses to where we are, or we need to educate everyone, it's contradictory, because you don't need to bring customers where you want them to be. You need to meet where they are, and you need to simplify whatever you have in order to make their experience better, period, right? It's not about bringing them where you are. It's not about educating them how to create a wallet, because in reality, if you think really at the large scale of 7 or 8 billion human beings living in this planet, how many people actually will care about going through the journey of creating a wallet because they really, really want to have ownership of their digital assets, and all their money is going to get out of the bank and be on their digital wallets and so on? The average Joe doesn't care about that either, right? I think that it's extremely important that that possibility is there and exists, but I don't think that everybody's going to care about that, right? So once you think from that angle, it's not about bringing them here and show the amazing things that we find and we are really excited about because we care. It's about how do we meet them where they are at, and how we solve challenges or tackle into opportunities that this technology provides that before it wasn't possible. Because a lot of times the most important thing is looking at the problem or the opportunity, reverse engineering the technology that solves it better, and then deploying that technology against it. What we've done a lot within this industry so far is we need to do something with blockchain. We need to do something in Web3. We need to do something in the metaverse. We need to do something with NFTs.
Where do you think this obsession came from? Plugging in terms like NFT, Web3, Metaverse, blockchain, it almost felt like a code. So brands felt like they had to do something, they must do something, and many of them deploying strategies that could be easily executed without the use of blockchain. So why was everybody obsessed with this?
It's the hype.
Yeah.
The hype blinds, and the hype's happening with AI right now as well, right? I see left and right people like, oh, AI just killed Excel. Oh, bye-bye doctors. You don't need doctors anymore. Oh, AI is going to take over the world and humans going to be, without any job and worthless. Like, is the hype, is the attention, right? People want to have attention, or brands want to have attention, or people want to surf the hype without necessarily deeply understanding or spending time to understand the ins and outs and the possibilities. So I think that's the simple answer. It's just, getting blind by the hype and fear of missing out. But going back to your point on Catch Max, for example, from Smart Token Labs, which, it's a great example of that. Instead of trying to onboard cricket fans into the space, they took all the layers of complexity and added things to that you cannot do with Web2 technology today.
Right.
And that's what's exciting.
Exactly.
Right. And that's kind of like the first pages of that playbook we were talking about. That displays exactly that, right? Because what's exciting within what they've done, but if you want to zone out to an overall strategy, what's exciting about that is that you start tapping into three things that are really important that every brand has and every entrepreneur dies for. The first thing is engagement. How do you generate more engagement? And not just generating engagement, how do you prove engagement, right? It's extremely difficult to do that in channels that you don't necessarily own. So, CRM or even your social channels and so on. It's extremely hard to measure, but also to prove, that sort of engagement in different channels. And within this technology, there is a very good chance that blockchain technology within that space can solve that problem, right? So imagine we already have some solutions for that. For example, proof of attention, proof of presence, right? Pull-ups. You can prove you've been to a certain place geographically. You are there when that event happened. You can prove you've engaged with a brand. You can prove, in my masterclass, for example, we have proof of attention. You go through a certain module. At the end of the module, you answer questions. If you got them right, you get a pull-up that proves that you paid attention to the course. Therefore, you went through that quiz, right? So there's different ways where you can start now proving things digitally that, before it wasn't necessarily super straightforward or simple to do because you didn't have one source or one place where all those proofs could be sort of like connected at, right? So this is an exciting way to look at that. If you want to build on top of that initial idea of now you are able to have those proofs of engagement and other proofs that is interesting from a brand perspective, you can now start rewarding customers for their presence, for their attention, for their engagement, for whatever they are proving to you, right? And imagine now that you can do that is extremely exciting because you can look into perks and rewards or money can buy experience and you can start providing to them, on which you can also bring that closer or together with your loyalty program or with your membership program, right? Now you start tapping into another element, which is interesting because currently membership programs or loyalty programs have many holes that they are not able to solve with Web2 technology. For example, integration of personal information or integration of data, right? Two partners want to engage with each other unless you have, you go through many hurdles of data integration to make sure that experience is seamless. It's extremely difficult to do. Therefore, it becomes a big blocker on why brands don't engage with each other in that level. Web3 has a very strong potential solution for that, which are smart contracts. As soon as you plug in an API in the back and you connect the two, it's very easy to sort of like have that data integration and enable that experience without having to touch any personal information, without having to go any close to breaking any GDPR rules and any of it, right? Super exciting. So as soon as you have now a way to prove something and then you have integration, you can start driving much more attention to, for example, already existing loyalty or membership program through partnerships, right? So imagine if you could potentially prove to, let's say, Nike, that you are a Peloton member and you've done an X amount of exercise. Now you can get that proof and go to a website like Nike's and prove to them that you've done certain things or you're from certain tiers. And Nike can proactively look into ways on which they can reward and give you something, as a customer acquisition or as a, upper funnel type of mechanic. That's exciting because then you start leveraging that concept of open loyalty, which is exactly what CatchMax has set to prove as a use case, right? Within that, now you start doing the third thing that every company, entrepreneur, brand is looking for, which is driving growth, right? So you can grow your audience, you can grow engagement, and you can have a long tail growth within, that sort of like membership and loyalty space of revenue and also different metrics that you can look at. So what is interesting within that specific use case you mentioned and the way we could sort of like dissect it is that there is a problem today within Web2 technology that is being within a program that is being tried to be solved through Web2 technology. There is an opportunity of doing the things we just covered that Web2 technology doesn't necessarily is the best solution to do it. And there is a way on which Web3 technology is really well positioned to solve it. So it becomes almost like that perfect storm of here is a place where there is a clear use case, a huge opportunity, and a why this technology could solve it. And that's why we should be looking more and more towards within the sort of like V2 playbook, where we start really tapping into opportunities and business problems and reverse engineering to see if this technology is in the best position to do it.
Right, yeah. I think what's interesting is that the desire for change and for adoption usually comes from CMOs, like even more junior people within organization who struggle to convince their leadership team why they need to experiment and start adopting blockchain and Web3. Because the way you put it, it's like so obvious, it's a no-brainer, but we still, you can still see that adoption is very slow. So what is your advice for people who are in this situation, who are struggling to convince their leadership team? Do you have any specific strategies or scenarios that have proven successful to get the ball rolling?
Yeah, I think that making it as not alien as possible is the way to sort of like look at that, right? So the last sort of like V1, if you want to stick to that playbook analogy, it was very, very alien to everybody to understand, right? You needed to like run, I've done many of them, like educational workshops for brands, right? Sitting with them, explaining what's happening, explaining what this is about, explaining why should they care, explaining what the advantages are, explaining what those words that people use mean, explaining the technology, explaining different things. So it was very alien to them because they had to go into a space that they have zero understanding of, and the metrics that they usually use to are very different, within that space. And also when you add layers of deep technology on a consumer-facing activation program project, it becomes extremely difficult for you to sort of like convey a message without getting too much into the tech, right? So I think that alien element of those things has made it really difficult for people to get traction internally. And that has come accompanied also by the fact that we haven't built yet within this industry that 1 billion pillar that you have in many different industries, and I'm talking revenue, that everybody can point to and is super easy to benchmark on, right? So I think we're still in this transitional element on which we are still trying to prove the value, but we don't have something extremely tangible to point to. And the things that we had before, or we still obviously do, is still very alien to majority of senior leadership, right? So the way I'm doing it and the conversations I'm having and my sort of like strategy is exactly what we just talked about, right? So how do you make it less alien by tapping into their world that they are already used to and make it simple for them to understand what the current problem and opportunity is, why the current technologies that are there are not the best suit for it, and why the technology that you're presenting has advantages over it and could potentially be the one that's going to disrupt that specific industry pillar or problem or opportunity that you have. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at that, right? And then you can obviously back that up with zooming out and analyzing consumer behavior, right? If you want to talk about metaverse, immersive experiences, virtual reality, augmented reality, immersive commerce, and all of that, you can easily understand and make a sort of like a clear line between customer behavior today, especially from the younger generations, where they're spending crazy amount of time and money within Fortnite and Roblox. And then you can understand that as soon as that demographic starts getting older, the tendency is that they're going to move closer to brands that they will fall in love on the way. And if those brands understand that behavior and are able to tailor experiences within their already existing channels or within their overall already existing strategy, it's going to be much easier for them to be well positioned whenever that shift starts happening, right? So that's the way I'm also sort of like trying to paint a clear picture and display that, it's not just necessarily about the now, obviously, but it's also a longer term strategy that what you're doing now will have, impact in the future.
No, absolutely. I want to shift your focus to something else. One trend I find really bizarre at the moment is AI killed Web3. Where did this come from? What does it mean? And why do we need to compare them at all? What is happening? Just tell me. I don't understand.
It did. It actually AI killed Web3, and I'm just looking for something else to do. So if you have anything else for me to do, please help me, because Web3 is dead, and I have nobody wants to hear anymore what I have to say.
Okay, so all the attention, all the hype now moved to the next shiny thing, right?
Exactly. It's quite simple to understand, right? People that are very vocal about technology, especially with takes like that, are the ones that do not understand it, right? Because simply put, we are building and reshaping how humans will engage with each other and interact with the digital space, right? It's going to be a consistent evolution. It's not, it didn't stay as it was in the 90s. It didn't stay as it was in the 2000s. It won't stay as it is in 2023. It's going to keep evolving and changing.
Right.
And Web3 is the supposedly next iteration of that, right? Web3 per se, as a wider concept, if you want, is going in a simple manner. You have blockchain as the backbone. You have, metaverse, immersive reality, digital worlds as the interface. And everything in between that being augmented reality, virtual reality, DeFi, decentralized finance, cryptocurrencies, blockchain, or any, even artificial intelligence, are part of how we will evolve the internet or evolve the way we connect digitally in the future. So in even a simpler way, you cannot build a stack of technology just with one technology. Right? You build stack of technologies with many technologies. Your phone has a stack of technologies that empower you to use your phone and go about your daily life. The internet is the same, right? When you go on your browser and every device has a stack of technology that enables you to do whatever you want to do or have a better experience, right? Therefore, looking from that angle, AI will be combined with other technologies that will enhance the future of how we experience the world digitally.
Right.
And thinking from that angle, as you said, it's extremely bizarre to think that one technology can actually kill the other, because it's rather the opposite. They get together to co-create something bigger. And it's going to keep happening as it happens since the world is the world, because technologies get together to make something better or worse, depending on how you want to look at that. But That's kind of like the way I'm looking at this.
I'm super interested in this topic, in the potential of blockchain and AI collaborating, if we can call it this way, to build like really more powerful, superior products. And I have like a few ideas in my head of how this could potentially evolve. And I'm really curious to hear from your point of view. What do you think would be some really interesting use cases that we're gonna start seeing in the near future?
Yeah, I have almost like I have three thoughts that
Go ahead. I want to hear them.
One is kind of like the now, the next, and the later, right? The now is what can be done now that's needed and exciting. I think that when you think about problem or opportunities that AI will create, there will be spaces within it that blockchain is extremely well positioned to tackle, right?
Let me
problem.
Guess. Can I guess?
Guess.
I have one idea. So mine is proof of ownership. I think with all the fakes and all the ingenuity we see coming from AI, I have the feeling that the power of blockchain will come with the proof of ownership.
Yeah, I would say proof of provenance to even wide it up, where it is, how can I know that the imagery of the Pope wearing the puffy jacket or that Trump was arrested running in the streets of New York, how can I know that that's real and that or that's fake whenever that technology gets so good, which it already is, but imagine when it gets perfect, that will be impossible to distinguish, right? It's a huge problem, as you just pointed out. And it's interesting that I believe that the tokenization or that sort of like proof of provenance, again, super simplified, not necessarily expecting people to understand and read blockchain and go on places like Etherscan to check on-chain activity. Super simplified, super simple. Simply proving, that image, the source is Getty Image, for example, or the source is that photographer, or the source is CNN, and you can see a badge almost or a validation element that displays you that indeed it's coming from that source.
Absolutely.
From a brand perspective, it's the same. I don't know if you remember, but when Elon changed on Twitter that you could verify, you could pay $8 and verify your handle. A lot of people were doing that for brands, and they start sort of like pranking brands and putting messages out, and a lot of consumers get confused why that brand was saying that and so on. Now imagine that at scale through video or through campaigns that will be created maybe by a competitor, maybe by a hater, that potentially will go everywhere, and people will think, oh my God, like did McDonald's really say that? That's crazy. And you will never be able to sort of like stop that unless you have that sort of like, oh no, that's bullshit. It's easy here. You can see it's not necessarily then, it's not true, right? So that's what can happen right now, right? I think that opportunity is there, the technology is there, the problem exists, and I think that I hope there are people building against that specific thing, because I definitely think is a clear use case. The second thing I'm excited, which is sort of like a little bit more on the next, is we talk a lot, and that's more technical, but we talk a lot about interoperability of different chains or different metaverses or different experiences, which today is extremely difficult to sort of like bring A and B together into one place and make them talk or make them connect or make them simply coexist, right? And it's becoming one of the hardest challenges that we spoke a lot about it since a very long time within Metaverse, but also within the blockchain world, right? So you have all the bridges, you have all the sort of like this chain doesn't speak with that chain, and this asset cannot be brought to that chain, and so on. And I think there is a really exciting opportunity to leverage AI as a way to co-create and help building those bridges, specifically from a coding perspective, right? Specifically from a development perspective, because I think that one of the strongest powers so far that I have seen, especially with ChatGPT, is how developers have been either challenging or refining or reviewing their own code through AI, right? So I find that to be extremely excited. And now, if you want to talk about the crazy shit, I believe that within the sort of like this next iteration of the web, we will move more and more towards a world where every asset will be tokenized, right? So if you look at the amount of things that you own on your daily life, on sort of like on the physical world, it's incomparable to the amount of things that you truly own or that you truly possess within the digital world. And I think that we will start seeing more and more that sort of like tokenization of things on the digital world, especially through Web3 and those type of technologies, that people now will be able, again, to prove things or to own digital items or to, just sort of like have tokens that will display some sort of, either ownership or relationship or anything. With that, combined with the fact that you, I, and everybody else that's interested will have an agent, AI agent operating on their behalf to buy, sell, trade, execute tasks, or do things digitally on their behalf, it becomes really interesting to think about also blockchain technology, because if I have an AI agent and I want that AI agent to go and purchase a airplane ticket or book a hotel or do things for me digitally that can be also microtransactions, I don't believe that banks will support a bank account for that AI agent to be able to transact with other services or other AI agents or humans digitally. I believe that as simple as starting or creating a wallet is gonna be the way on which there is a huge advantage for combining both technologies. So imagine your AI agent has a wallet, you put tokens on that wallet, cryptocurrency in that wallet, and the AI agent can go around and start, acquiring, buying, selling, trading, interacting with service products and so on digitally. Now, when you look at those three pillars, more things going to be tokenized. There is absolutely clear trend that AI agents will become, the sort of like advanced bots in the internet, and they will demand or need a way to transact with the ecosystem or interact with the ecosystem. When you combine those three things together, I think that's where really exciting opportunities can come along. I'm not saying that's going to happen now. That's why I'm putting that as sort of like the next pillar. But I definitely think that that's where there's a huge advantage for those technologies coming together.
Super exciting. I'm a huge believer in tokenization. I want to see, most industries being tokenized, and I can't wait to see what's in front of us. And before I let you go, Diego, what do you believe will be the next significant wave in Web3?
I think.
Be careful what you say. In 12 months' time, you'll be back here, and I'll be checking.
Saying that was full of shit. I think that what we really need within this space is that sort of like Google / ChatGPT moment, right? And what I mean by that is, if you look back at the beginning of the internet, especially when Google took off, you could go to a page, there was a bar in the middle of that page, you typed something, boom, a whole world would open up in front of you of information that, it needed zero explanation, and the simple action you've taken displayed an incredible result. Now, when you look at ChatGPT, and I'm following very closely their go-to-market strategy, it's exactly the same. You create an account, either with Google, whatever, or you just type your email, you go in, there is a bar, you type something in, and boom, entire new world opens up in front of you. Nobody needs to explain you how it works. Anybody that is a little bit familiar with technology can just jump in and do it, right? Now, if you compare our current ecosystem and the current experiences within the world we are at in Web3, we are far from that, right? So for me, the Google / ChatGPT moment is what's missing within our industry. And the more towards that direction we can work and build and push the industry to, the easier it's going to get for everybody to come on and utilize it without not even understanding what is powering it.
Absolutely. I think that's exactly how ChatGPT and all the AI products told the show, is that we saw immediate value. It was practical, it was useful, it was helping people be better, whatever they're doing. We are not seeing this necessarily so much with blockchain. We are seeing it, but it's not so widespread, and it doesn't make my life easier every day. So maybe that's what we are to see, the aha moment for the blockchain space.
The Product Show is brought to you by Pony, a design studio helping startups and scale-ups build and optimize their digital products at speed. Check pony.studio to learn more.